spouses who married the cool girl boy from your high school, what are they like now? Safe Harbor 870,913 said. My brother married the popular girl. She was homecoming queen, prom queen, on varsity teams, in band, an honor roll student, beautiful, and super nice. 17ish years and 2 kids later, she is still a sweetheart, beautiful, and athletic. AskReddit said. There's an anime I can't remember where the protagonist is telling someone, a love interest, a story, about his past, and rather than end it properly, he says and then aliens came down and attacked and the earth exploded, or something like that. He promises to tell them the rest of the story another time, and the next time he tells them that story, he finishes it. I also remember that, at least in the section where he mentioned the aliens, it became very intentionally basic in its animation style, as if a kid had drawn it. Is that anime which your comment is referencing, and if so, do you remember which one it is? It's gonna bother me otherwise. Edit. I also feel like the storyteller used this story as motivation for someone to accomplish a task before he gave them the true ending. I could be wrong about that, but that's my impression. My best guess right now is quintessential quintuplets, motivating them to finish some homework? Or Jujutsu Kaisen, because Gojo is a troll like that? 2 very different possibilities. Gonna go see if either yield fruit. Edit 2. No luck with either. I'm leaning more towards Quint than Kaisen. My wife says she remembers the scene as well. The only anime we've watched recently together are quintessential quintuplets or Unhost Club Hyouka erased my teen rom-com snafu. It's Nerfar Muffin said. My dad was super popular. Prom king, valedictorian, class president, football captain, etc. He has a high-ranking but normal role of a smallish to medium-sized company. Pretty normal guy and a good dad. If brought up he will mention his high school years but he doesn't brag. Jax said. There's also the fact that workouts in practice burn a lot of calories and transitioning away from burning thousands of calories a day under 2,000 can pack on the lbs quickly if you don't adjust your diet. The inverse can happen too. Allard of pro NFL linemen quickly shed pounds once they retire because they no longer need to be 350 pounds. White4 said. Mom was the cool girl. Still is. Still literally gets stopped by strangers talking about how cool pretty whatever she looks acts. But divorced, husband cheated, and widowed, second husband died, so never really managed to get a happily ever after in romance. I've only seen her as a grown-up of course, but going by pictures plus what I remember as a kid, she hasn't changed all that much. I think sometimes she's too used to people being in her orbit and will get sad if something happens where she's not involved. Not overtly so, but you can see she's expecting everyone to always want her there. Android Monk said, she's still the nicest and gorgeous girl I ever met. Nothing changed. She is studying to be a pharmacist. That's something no one would guess, since she always loved history and her school didn't id biology or chemistry. Edit. We weren't from the same school, but she was one of the most popular girl from the school, neighborhood and university class. I met her on a graduation we both gave up. It's just Magainmim said. My brother was the cool guy in high school. Even now, over 20 years later, he has what we call his fans that follow him everywhere. He has this posse built up of a rotating cast of best friends. He'll shine all his star power on his pick of the week then move on to another one. He's very charismatic, good-looking, life of the party so it's easy to navigate to him. He married the popular girl and his guy friends' wives are her friends. He can also be selfish, rude, dismissive and condescending. I tend to avoid him mainly because it's always a production with his gaggle of friends always around. Run Revolutionary 9019 said. My brother was one of the hottest guys in high school and went on to be a model. He's still cool and hot to many but now he's a bit fat. He's my brother so won the hot part in my opinion. But women still swoon and he's so obnoxious. Think Matt Dillon, etc. Era. He got dumped by his model 17 years younger wife for a 26-year-old. He has impossible standards and it's making him miserable. He's into these flashy shallow women. Overall he's doing really well and his business is thriving. Sensitive Infomax said. My mom was the cool girl all through high school, undergrad, grad school. But life didn't go that well. For most of her life, she had to be caring for someone in the family who was ill, and that took a huge toll on her. First it was her dad, then it was me. I had childhood illnesses, then her in-laws in quick succession, then her dad again, and finally she had to nurse my dad until he passed away from a terminal illness. She was meant to be social and have fun, and instead she was forced to be around sickness and sadness for her best years. But she is a very happy and mentally strong person in general who made the best of things. She hosted a lot of people and events. My house growing up was full of people visiting and having fun. She's very charming and easy to talk to, and has a lot of fans all the time. Though, my siblings and I find her social side rather annoying. She isn't like that with us, and she tells us her charming side is just an act, and the real her is the lady who is constantly critical of us for our own good. She likes having groupies hanging around, people who are happy to take her help and be grateful to her. She has very few friends who could be considered her equals. She also expects a lot from other people and is constantly disappointed. She wants to be the center of everything. She doesn't know to be a guest at anything. She somehow ends up running every event she's invited to. She sincerely believes she's helping, but it's just disrespectful sometimes, and when we tell her that, she doesn't get it. She likes to dominate everything and make decisions for everyone. We joke that if the Prime Minister was her friend, she'd somehow end up running the country for him. 007 Mom said, I hate to be the one that bursts everyone's bubble, but my husband was the good-looking athletic guy with a great sense of humor that all of the girls adored. I was the petite blue-eyed blonde cheerleader that he chased for all 4 years in high school. We ended up getting together after high school graduation and were engaged 6 months later. I should have kept running from him like I did in school. He's now an addict who is verbally and emotionally abusive. He's a compulsive liar and he's stolen prescription medication from me to get high. He's very jealous and has accused me of having an affair with every Molly I've ever worked with, all without any merit whatsoever. It got so bad at one point that he told me I needed to quit my job and stay home with my son. Then he criticized me for not having a job. I teach high school English, and he is jealous of my Molly students because he claims he sees the way they watch me and look at me. He's made my life hell. He criticizes and ridicules me for being a diabetic, saying he never intended to marry a cripple, which is hardly the case. I'm happy to say that he'll be getting served with divorce papers very soon. God help the woman who takes my place because he can't do anything for himself. He's never paid a bill, made his own doctor appointments, etc. He's exhausting. He's also that guy who likes to tell her son what a stud he was in school and how he eventually got the girl he wanted. While dating, he portrayed himself to be the man he thought I would see as husband material. However, I quickly saw it was all an act shortly after we married. If I had it to do over, I would have left the country to avoid him. The only good thing to come out of our marriage is my son. I'm sorry that my story was the nightmare in the bunch. I'm just keeping it real. Sam Nelspa State said, my mom was the nerdy girl who got all the A's and had zero social skills, and somehow managed to start dating my dad, who was the popular, good-looking guy everyone thought would peak in high school. She was actually advised by her family and friends that he wouldn't give her the future she was hoping for. They got married at 19, had me when they were 20, and while they were pretty broke the first few years of my life, he paid for my mom to attend law school, started his own business, and 25 years later with 3 kids, they're still so in love and have a pretty cushy life. My dad actually met one of the loud voices who told my mom she was making a big mistake marrying him, and she had said how she always knew he would turn out well, which he found hilarious. Criticus said, we didn't go to school together, but I married the captain of the cheerleading team. She's a very down-to-earth, good human being who never been one to be elitist or a snob in any way. She does wish she still had her high school body, who doesn't, but she looks more beautiful to me now than she does in any old pictures. We have a large family and are very happy. Every once in a while I'll be acting goofy with my kids and their friends will give me the side eye and I'll casually drop, you think I'm a nerd, huh? Well, maybe so, but I married the captain of the cheerleaders for some reason. This gets me instant credibility with young men. Tired 3520 said, he was the one who had a six-pack who all the girls swooned over. Very popular. I was not. Saw him after just leaving HS and started going out. Ended up getting married in our early 20s. God knows why. I guess we thought it was just what happened next. He never grew up. All he wanted to do was play online games. But I mean constantly. He would get in from work, walk straight past me to the spare room, straight online and play until the early hours. Get a bit of sleep, go back to work. Same thing, again and again. Never wanted to go anywhere. Just wanted to game. Eventually, I gave him an ultimatum. He chose the game. From what I gather, he's remarried to someone else we went to school with and has 2 kids now. I was told she had to give him an awful lot of ultimatums before he eventually grew up. Auber said, "My husband was the coolest of his high school, different HS from mine. I met him a few years later, hanging with the same friends but now providing for them also. They kept talking about HS years and it was oh so freaking boring. It was very difficult and painful to wean him from them, but here we are 26 years later. People adore him because they see him as larger than life, but always kind. He gives of his time to so many, he's still the coolest wherever he goes." Sor Albagubrath said, "Not sure if he was necessarily cool, but my dad was prefect and head boy of his school, got along nicely with everyone and was responsible. They didn't have prom there, so that was the highest honor you could probably get. Worked hard and all and had his classmates help to tutor him. His grades didn't end up great because he came in late to school once and got after-school detentions. He would go home late and finish homework overnight, then get up at the crack of dawn to wash his father's bus and be late to school again, more detentions. He dropped out and transferred to another school. Now he's a retired policeman who is working in security to send me and my siblings to school, does his best still. In my mom's view he's still handsome and she calls him a multitude of cutesy nicknames that he pretends to hate. Life is always as tough as normal but he keeps going." Corporation T-shirt said, "Okay, here's one. I worked with this dude at a grocery store in high school, and had classes with him at a private Catholic high school. He was weird, but fairly popular back then. We hung out very occasionally, but he was always a little off, and anytime I talked with him post-high school, he really creeped me out. And then there was this https://law-and-crime.com/man-allegedly-went-to-discard-arizona-murder-victims remains. I never, ever thought he would be capable of something like this, but at the same time, any interaction I had with him post-high school was just so bizarre." Glory I said, "I notice a lot of they need to move on and leave that stuff in the past posts about spouses, be it football or whatever. Maybe that's when they felt most accepted, loved, and had the most people that cared about them, and now in the future they don't have that and keep thinking about the past as something they wish could have continued. Maybe it's not always them that has the issue with that, but rather those complaining about it. I married my best friend and we had practically everything in common. As time went on she became completely different. Everything we had in common is no longer an interest to her and I'm looked at as childish because I've continued to be myself and like what I like. I've watched her grow up and move on with life and lose everything that made her the person I knew back then, and I'm the one that's told I need to change. I'm the one trying to hold on to the past because that's when life was a joy. Don't always be so quick to dismiss those that reminisce because they could be lacking important closeness with people that you may not be providing." Katie's Paper Caper said, "I can see what you're saying, but honestly, it depends as everything does. If responsibilities remain the same then sure, it's disappointing that a spouse who acted one way, enjoyed doing certain things, is no longer acting that way and those shared interests are gone. But at the same time, people do grow and change. That isn't a reason to demean someone whose interests didn't change though. That's wrong, and I'm sorry you have experienced that. However, if someone enjoys spending a lot of time doing something, but then decides to have a child or buy a house or a million other added responsibilities adults can have, and doesn't want to help their spouse with household duties or raising the children, it is a problem. Then, the spouse who doesn't want to share in the responsibilities will say their spouse changed, and they don't do what they used to, or the person with shared interests they fell in love with, but the truth is that the circumstances demanded a change of priorities. Then those responsibilities weren't shared, so they had no time to do the things they used to love, and grew to resent those activities because their spouse chose to continue overindulging in those activities instead of helping their partner. This still isn't a reason to demean a partner's interests, but in this situation it comes from frustration of not getting help and generally starting to resent the spouse. I'm not saying this is your situation, I'm just describing what I've seen sometimes when this is said. It leads to a lot of divorces, It also happens that people will pretend to enjoy things to get someone to marry them, and then change and become emotionally abusive to their partner gradually over time, and eventually the abused spouse is broken down and miserable. It can be hard to find a good partner. I hope you are able to work things out and find happiness. AskRedditor said. Instead of high school, I'll tell the story of the most popular kid at my middle school and what happened to him. Jeff was a really big deal in middle school. We went to different elementary schools, so I never even heard of him prior to middle school, but as soon as I got to middle school his name was going around the school a lot and it became clear he was a big deal. Jeff was the toughest guy in our grade, the most athletic, the best looking, and the coolest according to both the guys and the girls. The guys wanted to be his friend, and if they weren't then they were wary of him because of how tough he was, and he gave off that vibe that he wasn't someone to make angry. All the girls loved him and he was making out with girls and going out with them all the time. He even went out with at least 2 girls a year ahead of us in school, and one of them was the most popular girl in her grade. This was basically unheard of, but he did it. He was in my class in the 6th grade and it became pretty clear that despite his coolness, toughness, and ability with the girls at a young age, Jeff had some problems and couldn't control himself that well. He would act out in funny ways by causing mischief and trouble, but he would also act out in less funny yet troubling ways by doing things like smoking cigarettes on school grounds with other troubled kids, and he would occasionally get physical with any guy dumb enough to piss him off. Because of this, he got detentions and suspensions. AskRedditor said. That year our class had a field trip to some place that I don't remember, but I do remember the bus ride to and from the trip. Jeff and I were on the same bus, and for some reason still unknown to me he decided to sit next to me. On the way there he was talking to me about different things, and since I thought he was a bully and tough and I was afraid of him, I just was nice and would listen and then follow up with questions and try to interact with him, and he seemed to be cool with that. Then at some point he started talking about his home life and his dad, and he said that his dad would hit him upside the head. When he told me this he had his eyes averted and sort of looking down, and he said it kind of like it was a joke, but I could tell that he was upset by it and was trying to play it off cool and by acting like it wasn't some big deal. On the bus ride back to school we stopped at some place and there were these vending machines that some kids were getting snacks out of. I went to get myself a snack and a drink, and I got my drink, but something happened when I tried to get my snack. I can't remember what it was exactly. It may have been that I thought I had more money than I did, and when I went to get my snack I came up short for money, or it could have been that the machine ate my money. Whatever happened, I couldn't get my snack and I was upset because I was pretty hungry. Without asking him or saying anything, Jeff just stepped in front of me and said, "I got you," and put $1 in the machine for me so I could get my snack. Then we sat next to each other on the way back to school after that. AskRedditor said. At some point during that year we had a substitute teacher for our class and some kids were acting out and I was laughing because it was funny. Our substitute was a middle-aged woman and she was not happy at all. She was yelling at us to shut up and knock it off, and she physically grabbed me by the shoulders and then started pushing me downward into my chair and desk, and I was frightened by it. I was scared and didn't know what to do, and she was hurting me. When class ended Jeff grabbed me by the arm and said, "Come on, we're going to the office," and he basically pushed me and pulled me down the hallway to the principal's office. I wasn't going to say no to the guy in a million years because I was afraid of him. We get to the office and he does all the talking and tells the principal what happened while I just sit there in silence, nodding each time that the principal asks me if what Jeff is saying is true. See, the principal had and would go on to have numerous run-ins and issues with Jeff because Jeff could not behave and kept getting into trouble way too often. The principal was wary of him and didn't trust him much, and I suppose he had good reason not to. However, I still remember the concerned look on his face when Jeff was telling him what happened. When Jeff was done talking we left the office and the principal said he'll look into the incident, and that's all I remember. I figured that Jeff was just using me to act out and cause trouble or give the principal a headache and having to deal with him yet again. I was too afraid of Jeff to say to him that I didn't want to go to the office, so what happened, and that was that. AskRedditor said. Jeff was expelled from school early in the 8th grade. Word spread around the school quickly because the kid was such a big deal. I don't remember why he got kicked out exactly or what the final straw was. He basically disappeared in 2003 and I never saw him again, or so I thought. He was off my radar for years, and I had heard that he got kicked out of his second school after he got kicked out of ours, and then in high school he got kicked out of a Catholic school and then wound up at a pretty crappy public school. I didn't know at the time whether he even finished high school or not. In the fall of 2007 I was a senior in high school and I was hanging around at a friend's house after a party ended on the weekend. Seemingly out of nowhere, Jeff shows up with a guy I used to be friends with in earlier years. I hadn't seen Jeff since 2003. He was still big, looked about 6'3", and still had that kind of socially and physically dominant way about him. He was joking around with the guy he came with and he playfully pushed him on the shoulder after making a joke and the guy almost lost his balance and fell over. Jeff just couldn't help it. Being the alpha male and dominant is how he always was. I was sitting on the couch with my friend and the guy who hosted the party and then the guy who almost got pushed over smiled at Jeff a bit and said, "You remember, insert my name here." And Jeff stared at me for a few seconds. I definitely didn't look exactly like I did in middle school, but he stepped closer to me and looked me in the eyes and put his hand out to shake my hand but didn't say anything to me. Then he went back to drinking the beer he had and joking around. That's the last time I saw him before he died. AskRedditor said. Jeff died a few years ago, I think from a drug overdose, heroin probably. He was 27. I determined that at some point his father, who was abusive and likely violent with him when he was a kid, left the family, likely when Jeff was about 15 or 16. It looked like Jeff and his mom and little sister had to leave our town and they wound up in a crummier, more rundown area. He fell into the druggy crowd in later years after he was kicked out of middle school, and I suppose this shouldn't have been surprising because his older brother overdosed on heroin and died when me and Jeff were in the 7th grade. I remember that going around the school at the time and people talking about it in whispers. It took me until I was 30 years old to put my brief yet meaningful moments with Jeff together. I went my whole life thinking that he was the school bully and I was afraid of him, yet I realized eventually that I never saw him bully anyone and that he never bullied me. I remembered our time on the bus together and our trip to the office, but I couldn't connect the dots at the time. Now I realize that on the bus, Jeff was grateful that I listened to him talk about his dad hitting him, and because I was nice and good to him. When I needed help at the vending machines he had my back, no questions asked. When our substitute teacher did what she did to me, I later realized that this happened after the bus trip and vending machines day. Because I was nice and good to him, when he saw what the teacher did to me, he didn't decide to use me as a way to act out and start trouble. He was just trying to help me because he apparently cared and was concerned. When I saw him after that party was over in high school, he truly did remember me, and he remembered those moments we had together where we had each other's backs in the 6th grade. He could have just said what's up when the other guy asked him if he remembered me, but instead of that he moved towards me and shook my hand. AskRedditor said. Because even after years of having nothing to do with each other, those 6th grade memories came back to him that night, but not to me at the time. At 30, I put it all together. I'm truly sad that he's gone, and when we were kids I would have never thought that I would say that about him, feel that way about him, or that he would die young. The guy was the biggest deal and the last person I would have thought wouldn't make it in life, but sadly his demons and troubles took him away. Once I understood Jeff, I began thinking of him as a legend of my childhood. Recently I realized that calling Jeff a legend, while accurate and true, doesn't truly explain and express what he means to me. In a life filled with much hurt and pain doled out to me by the people whom I used to call friends and family, as well as abuse dished out by others out there, Jeff is one of the only people whose friendship and goodness is not tainted by time and by the memory of how people eventually began to treat me over time. All that he ever was good to me, respectful, kind, decent, caring, supportive, fearless, empathetic, friendly, and true. He was never anything bad to me for as long as I knew him. That's why calling him a legend doesn't quite express what he is to me all these years later. He's my hero. Hospital Flowers said. I sat next to the popular guy every day pretty much for 5 years, and I was so afraid of speaking to him. I watched him and his friends picking each other up and shoving the chosen one into lockers, or chasing each other round into a pylon and throwing their shoes at each other. Typical school shit. They were rowdy and loud and intimidating, but he was the quiet yet seriously funny one, and I crushed on him hard for years. He remembers me as the little blonde girl who didn't speak to anyone, because I was so anxious all the time. He also protected his sister from some assholes every break time, and she'd come to find him for safety from bullies. Should have spoken to him sooner when school finished, because we have the same music taste and we get on well enough now at 26 that we have a 6-month-old daughter together, my daughter from a previous relationship, and we just got engaged last weekend. I adore him. He's handsome, charming and funny, and I would do anything for this man as he would for me. Made Stories said, I married the student council president prom king. He jokes that he peaked in high school. Graduated 20 years ago. He dropped out of 3 colleges and hasn't found a career path he is passionate about. He hates his job, but he's actually really good at it. He's kind of trapped in it because it would be incredibly difficult for him to find a new job without a degree. He's a good husband. He's an amazing father. He struggles with anxiety and some depression. A lot of self-doubt. He's incredibly social and the pandemic hit hard. He's put on weight and hates his body. He admits that he worries about what other people think of him and wants people to like him. He's introspective and wants to be a better person, but anxiety gets in the way sometimes. He married a hot nerd LOL, but we didn't meet until college. I felt a little intimidated by his popular past, but he's very down to earth. Folding the Cheese 99 said, I married the popular guy. We didn't go to the same schools, or even in the same city, but met when we were 30. Extremely charismatic and likable. Also used to having everything handed to him and done for him. He constantly spoke about how prior to me, he always was with hot girls and that he basically settled for me. I know I'm pretty but I'm also overweight. He didn't seem to realize that while he was in shape in high school from playing sports, he ballooned up as an adult. We divorced earlier this year. He's already living with potential wife number 3 and me and his first wife have bonded over how terrible he treats his spouses. Yep. He's 35 and working on wife number 3, but he doesn't think he has behavior that needs to change because he spent his whole life hearing he was the best. Dinky Dinky said, not married but my boyfriend was a popular athlete at his high school. We met way later in life. He was super confident and well liked, and also super loyal to his friends. He was the one invited to all the parties. I was very much the opposite and just very quiet and studious with a small circle of close friends. He is to this day super confident and knows very much what he wants and needs, which makes my life so much easier. Our dynamic is a little funny since he's an extrovert and I'm a total introvert, so he can forget that I find chatting all day to be exhausting. Wouldn't trade him for the world though, he makes my world whole. Bella Centauri said, gay people seem to get that experience after they leave school, so I'll take that. My GF was his super hot shit. She's very charismatic, everybody likes her. Wants her opinion or advice. For good reason. She's a great human being who continually improves herself and is the most loyal supporter. There's this gaggle of girls though, that texts her every few weeks to check on her relationship status. They're doing it since forever. I don't think she ever planned on dating someone who teaches people programming languages. So as a nerd and invisible person when it comes to coolness, I'm feeling pretty chuffed about the whole thing. Mountainman84 said, we're divorced now but my ex-wife was a popular cheerleader in high school. I didn't even know much about her younger years when we were dating. I remember cracking up when she busted out a yearbook to show me. She said she loved high school and had a great time. Had lots of friends and ran with the popular kids. I was the total opposite. I hated those years of my life. I remember telling her that she probably would have disliked me if we had known each other as teenagers. I was a computer nerd that was into painting and graphic design. I was bullied a lot just for being socially awkward and super introverted. I was always carrying around and reading books instead of interacting with anyone. Anyway, the ex-wife isn't doing so well from what her current soon-to-be ex-husband told me. She had, and still has, a drinking problem when we divorced, but I got out relatively unscathed. She had a kid with this other guy a couple years ago and ended up getting a DUI, not her first. She lost her license and they ended up splitting up. Due to her alcoholism, he got an order of protection against her after several domestic disturbances where she got violent. He is still going through the court system, but he will likely get full custody of their kid because she has violated a couple orders of protection to come after him. She is on probation now too, which I think she has violated as well. Overall, her life sounds like a mess. I feel bad for the guy because he is essentially me if I had decided to stay with her. I feel bad for her too because I know a lot of her issues are due to her dysfunctional childhood. We tried therapy twice but she was quite hostile and resistant to it.